used to believe grief would move through a house like slow weather, that it would stain the curtains and then fade, that I could memorize its weight the way I'd learned the creak of the back steps and the timing of the kettle. My name is Helena Archer. I am 67, and for the past year, I have lived alone in a modest brick home at the corner of Linden and Maple, where the ash tree throws a kind shade and the mailman knows to leave packages under the blue ceramic goose. My husband, Thomas, was a careful man, the kind who kept ledgers in tidy columns and hummed old records on Sunday mornings. When he died, silence settled over the rooms like new snow. The house had always sounded like him distant music, a laugh in the hallway, coins in a bowl near the door, and now it seemed to listen back at me, as if waiting for a cue it would never get. He left me prepared, at least on paper, a pension, conservative funds, a portfolio he explained with patience and pencil drawings, enough for a gentle old age. But prepared does not mean ready. My daughter, Clara, is 41 and married to a man who enjoys glossy things, a new car smell every year, steaks as thick as a book, the kind of watch that catches the light when he adjusts his cuff. She began visiting with a softness I hadn't seen since she was little. She told me I should meet people, that a widow's mind needs fresh air. She mentioned the senior group at the community center where they played cards, kept a book circle, sometimes danced. I went because daughters know how to press the bruise they're trying to heal. On my third visit, I met him. His name was Vincent Hale, 70, a widower, gray hair combed back with an easy vanity, eyes the color of the spot in the sky just before it turns to evening. He listened the way good librarians do, and I was one for 35 years. So I know. He asked questions about my garden, about Thomas's old records, about the way quiet feels when you discover it can be an edge. We started seeing each other, and my afternoons opened like windows. He brought small bouquets in odd jars, and once, a slim book of poems with pages dog-eared in the same places I might have chosen. Clara said he was wonderful. She said it like a blessing she wanted credit for. After 3 months, under a spatter of winter stars in my backyard, I said yes while my hands shook the way they do when joy and fear share a cup. We married at the courthouse with only Clara and her husband standing to the side like pleased managers. For a while, I believed I'd been given a second season that would require nothing of me but warmth. Vincent moved in and learned the names of my roses. He praised my cooking as if I were writing a song. We listened to Thomas's records without speaking, a sacrament of quiet. My neighbor across the street, Joan Whitaker, 83, sharp as a tack and meaner than she lets on, watched all of it from her porch, where she collects gossip and monarch butterflies. One afternoon, she said she'd seen Vincent once, months before I'd joined the center, drinking coffee with Clara at the downtown cafe and leafing through papers with the quick, conspiratorial touch of people dividing a pie. I told myself Joan's memory stitched events with bad thread. I told myself coincidence happens in small towns more than statistics allow. I told myself many things women tell themselves when their bodies know and their minds refuse the knowledge. When Vincent and Clara approached me about money, they did it with the kind of loving exasperation caretakers practice in the mirror. There were too many accounts, too many statements. They said, why not fold them into one clean family account? With Clara as a helper so I wouldn't be bothered with signatures and transfers. A lawyer appeared, smooth voice, polished shoes, a handshake that felt like the second half of a trick. I signed because I was grateful for attention, because gratitude can be a sleight of hand too. Soon after, little amber bottles of memory vitamins showed up on my nightstand. Vincent's colleagues swore by them. Clara said, women in my book circle had heard of them too, or so she claimed. I began to lose nouns, then directions. then pieces of myself I thought were nailed down. They tutted and comforted, and when I saw the pity in their eyes, I watched myself step into the outline they had pre-drawn for me. The fog inside my skull arrived as a courtesy at first. The way polite guests stand in the doorway and ask if it's a good time. I would set my teacup in the pantry and wonder why it looked so industrious among the tins. I would start a sentence confident of its destination and end it staring into the blank like a dog who's lost a scent. Names I'd shelved a lifetime with professional pride fell from the mind's ladder and landed without sound. Vincent was saintly about it, so gentle that I sometimes hated him for being so perfect. He excused my lapses with a murmured, "We all misplace things," and Clara performed worry like a harpist plays the strings elegantly. For an audience, I felt myself shrinking. A house cleared one drawer at a time. The day the fear hardened into something else began with a small miscalculation on Vincent's part. He is careful. I will give him that. He keeps a calendar that looks like a loom, and he checks locks twice. He aligns forks in the drawer the way some men iron shirts. That afternoon, he took a call in his study. His voice low but urgent. When he rushed out something about a meeting, he'd forgotten he left a phone on the kitchen counter. Not his usual one with the scuffed case and the wallpaper of a sailboat, but a sleek, dark device I'd never seen. The kind of newness men don't admit to when they already own a good thing. It was unlocked. I wish I could say I hesitated to pick it up, but instinct can be cleaner than morality. The photos began roughly 2 years earlier. A cafe table, Clara leaning in, head cocked, conspiratorially pretty in a way daughters can be when they want something. Vincent studying a sheaf of papers. Clara and Vincent at a lakeside in spring. At a restaurant where the napkins are folded like ideas. In a dim hotel room where they looked pleased in that unguarded way that grants a stranger too much knowledge. Then messages Clara telling him I was newly widowed and lonely. Vincent agreeing with professional warmth. Outlines of a timetable, talk of cooperation with an attorney. A detail that burned notes about the vitamin's dosage and span. The phrase established pattern of decline. The plan for a capacity evaluation managed by a compliant practitioner. A line that crushed me to a kind of gravel, the two of them dreaming in texts of a life abroad once my portfolio had been harvested. Italy, specifically. As if my life's work could be rinsed and hung to dry as a backdrop for their afternoons. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place I'd taught Clara to count using beans, and felt the first clean anger seize me like a spine. Grief had made me quiet because quiet is useful when you don't know how to proceed. This was not grief. This was theft, with manners. I poured the vitamins into the toilet and watched them spin away. Bitter little coins for a god I refused to worship. Then I called Joan, who came faster than gossip travels. I showed her the photos and texts. She read like a juror and breathed like a boxer. And when she looked up, there was something old and useful in her face, like a farming tool that still fits the hand. She said we'd need an attorney who knew how predators dress when they hunt respectable prey. She suggested her niece, Naomi Chen, a litigator with a reputation for the kind of tenacity that leaves neat scars. Naomi met me the next morning and listened without performing sympathy, which I appreciated more than sympathy itself. She read what I'd saved. By then, I'd photographed every message and sent the files to an email account with an address so dull, I'd forget it if I hadn't written it on a paper tucked inside a cookbook. Naomi said we had a case that would interest not just a civil court, but the criminal side of the house. That elder abuse with pharmaceutical assist is a crime with sharp teeth. She said we would not tug on the net just yet. We would let the fish swim tired. And then she laid out a plan that felt like oxygen after too many weeks in a windowless room. Naomi's plan had the elegance of good chess. 1. Let them believe they were winning. I was to continue taking the vitamins in front of them and continue not taking them once they left the room. I was to lose keys and find them too late. I was to ask the same question twice and apologize for repeating myself. I was to practice a tremor in the hand that signed papers. A slight delay in recall. The symptom set of the story they had chosen for me like a costume. 2. While they laid their bricks. Naomi would lay hers. Independent neurocognitive testing with a court-respected specialist who would ask me to draw clocks and recall lists and solve word problems that tickled the same pleasure centers my old cataloging work once did. Deep dives into bank statements and shell companies and transfers that felt like the blink of an eye, but were in fact the blink of a conscience. 3. Time the trap to their appetite. Through the messages, we knew they were planning a final move, a meeting with my longtime financial advisor, Daniel Ellison, to present papers granting them authority to reorganize, liquidate, and consolidate. The word consolidate always made my jaw clench. It is polite, sonorous, and in this context, it meant theft varnished to a shine. Naomi spoke to Daniel, who agreed to host the performance and lock the door behind the actors at the appointed beat, in the weeks between plan and capture. I lived like an understudy who suddenly has the lead. Every hour required concentration. Vincent's kindness became more elaborate. A nest he fluffed to smother me. Clara shifted from warmth to chill, depending on what verified her script. If I was sunny and clear, she was cool and cut. If I faltered, she turned the wattage up and called me brave. Sometimes I watched her and thought of the girl who'd once painted my nails while we watched a thunderstorm at 8:15 p.m. and named the distance between lightning and thunder, as if we could measure fate. We had taught each other the language of weather. She had gone and learned a different grammar. Joan kept watch from her porch and, in the evenings, kept me company at the kitchen table while we practiced forgetting, and then not forgetting. There is a strength in being believed by someone with nothing to gain. I learned the contours of my anger, the way a seamstress learns a pattern, by laying it out on a flat surface and pinning it, by cutting where the line demands. The neuropsychologist tested me for 2 mornings. I enjoyed it, the way one enjoys relief from pain. Numbers lined up, words returned on cue. He told me I'd kept my mind the way some people keep gardens tended and resilient. Naomi locked his report in her office safe with the other materials, the message transcripts. The bank trails, Joan's sworn statement that included the cafe sighting and odd deliveries and whispered doorways. The meeting with Daniel was set for a Friday. Because fraud prefers respectable days. Clara was nearly giddy on Thursday night. Vincent trimmed his beard too close on one side. A small human error I would remember later as proof that even careful men nick themselves when they hurry. They left me alone for an hour that evening, and I walked through each room of my house, laying a hand on the backs of chairs and the edges of picture frames, saying the names of things out loud: lamp, window, hinge, door. It felt like counting allies. I thought about Thomas and the way he would approve of this measured fury. He believed in patience, but not the kind that lets harm dress up as duty. I slept hard and woke early. At 7:30 a.m., I brewed coffee strong enough to polish metal and ate toast I could barely taste. By 2:00 p.m., we were in Daniel's conference room. The air cold enough to keep a head firm. Sometimes a room becomes larger because of what it is about to hold. Daniel's conference table had been the site of little victories and necessary resignations for more than 2 decades of my life. We had refinanced there, and once we had laughed too loud for such a room when a fund performed better than it had any right to. That day, the table looked like a stage. Daniel greeted us with professional warmth and the careful tone of a man trained to resist both charm and panic. Vincent took the seat to my left as if he were guarding me. Clara sat opposite, the document folder by her elbow like the weapon in a drawing room mystery, only without the decency of guilt. They opened with pleasantries, and then Clara nudged the papers forward. Daniel's face, kind and steady, became the kind of stillness that leaves ripples in the air. He held the pages to the light, not for show, but because that's what men like him do when they smell a solvent in the ink. He asked me, carefully, whether I understood the nature of the documents. Clara jumped in with the briskness of a person afraid of silence. Of course I understood. Of course I had asked them to help. Of course simplicity is best at my age. I nodded at Daniel, the kind of nod Naomi and I had practiced nearly invisible, entirely decisive. The door opened. Naomi entered wearing the face all good attorneys keep for decisive moments, not triumph, not flourish, simply inevitability arranged as courtesy. Two detectives stepped in behind her, the kind who treat rooms like tools. The light in Vincent's eyes changed the way sky changes before a storm announces itself with rain. Clara's mouth opened and closed, a fish thrown ashore by the sea's sudden refusal. Naomi put a thick folder on the table. She spoke with calm precision about conspiracy and fraud, and the meticulous paper trail of elder abuse disguised as care. Daniel confirmed that he had been presented with a power of attorney that did not match past signatures and had been accompanied by behavior from me that tracked panic far more than confusion. The detectives read names. Handcuffs are not symbolic. They are efficient. Vincent went a shade I had never seen on a human who still inhabited the room. Clara slid into fury, then shock, then a child's pleading tone so misplaced it scraped. She asked how I could do this to her, and I heard the extraordinary grammar of abusers in that question, the transformation of defense into offense, the insistence that the wound you refuse to tolerate is the wound you are creating. I felt no satisfaction, only relief, the kind you feel when someone finally closes a window left open in winter. They were let out, and I sat still and quiet while the residue of adrenaline dried in my veins. Naomi touched my shoulder lightly, a courtesy touch, not ownership. Daniel poured me water and did not speak until I spoke first. We signed what had to be signed to keep what needed keeping safe. When I walked out into late afternoon, the sky had the polished look of a day that had decided to perform well at the end. Joan was waiting in her car and honked once, a sound both victorious and very human. We ate pie at 5:30 p.m. like conspirators at the end of a long novel, and for the first time in months, I slept without waking at 2:00 a.m., with my heart sounding like a hammer. The next days were a hum of process statements taken, accounts restored, passwords changed, locks replaced, a new will drafted with clauses built like strong hinges. Naomi said charges would be filed swiftly. The evidence was not only abundant, but tidy. The way careless people fail to imagine their future selves, explaining the past. I spent long mornings in the garden, deadheading roses, letting the small daily cuts remind me that tending something beautiful always draws a little blood, and it is worth it anyway. In the evenings, I played Thomas's records and discovered I had been listening to grief with one ear closed. It now sounded like something honest rather than something that wanted me to forget my own name. Trials are not stories, even when they contain everything stories like villains, heroes, turning points, comeuppance. They are procedures that grind toward truth at a speed that feels petty until, suddenly, it doesn't. The district attorney charged Clara, her husband, and Vincent with conspiracy to commit fraud and felony elder abuse, as well as forgery and unlawful administration of a substance without consent. I learned new phrases: financial exploitation, coercive caretaking, capacity fabrication. I learned that ugliness loves paperwork because papers wear suits in court. I also learned that community matters in ways statistics don't capture. Women I'd known from the community center, neighbors who had waved from porches, a pharmacist who'd wondered at the renewal rate on a supplement he'd never seen prescribed. All of them wrote down what they'd noticed. Naomi assembled a tower out of their observations and the digital leash Vincent and Clara had placed on themselves with their gleeful planning. The defense tried to argue that the messages were taken out of context, that the vitamins were over the counter, that I had invited a simplification I later regretted. Naomi did not raise her voice. She let the dates handle the volume. She placed the 2-year arc on a table and left it there until the room learned the shape of it. I testified once a measured session where I was asked to recount my feelings and the sequence of events and the contents of the kitchen phone. The neuropsychologist testified too. He used polite language to say I was in full possession of myself, and that women like me are often misread because our quiet is misdiagnosed as decline. The verdict came like weather that had been forecast for days and still surprised people who don't own umbrellas. Sentences were neither light nor vindictive. They were the kind that make a point while leaving enough of a life for reflection. Vincent looked at me just once when the judge read the terms. I saw in his eyes a calculation collapsing. The way a bridge gives out not all at once, but segment by segment. Clara did not look at me at all. I wanted to feel fury, or triumph, or even the great flatness of indifference. But what I felt was adult sorrow, the kind that has room for the truth that we are responsible for our choices, and also shaped by more than our choices. That forgiveness is not a currency other people can spend for you. The months after the trial were a study in restoration. Naomi guided me through reclaiming what had been taken and securing what might be targeted again. Not because I am paranoid, but because caution is a type of love. Daniel designed a portfolio that required my signature in ways no fraudster would find inviting. I met with a counselor at 3:10 p.m. on Wednesdays for a while and spoke out loud about helplessness and rage and how shame sneaks in when you've been tricked by someone you loved. Shame has to be pulled into the daylight like old carpet. Underneath is a floor you can sand and seal. Joan started coming over for tea most afternoons, and we grew a ritual out of ordinary things: boiling water, choosing cups, discussing birds. It felt like prayer without petition. I found a sketchbook at the back of a drawer and started drawing rooms from memory: the tilt of a lampshade, the circle of light on a countertop, like I was reminding the house I still knew its bones. I thought often about women like me who do not have a Joan or a Naomi or a Daniel, who have daughters too skilled at playing the violin of pity for anyone else to hear the wrong notes. It made me angry in a way that wanted a job. I called the nonprofit center downtown and asked how one begins an effort without building a monument to oneself. They told me the secret is a small mission and a ruthless attention to the practical. We built the Archer Fund for Elder Justice around a straightforward promise when someone over 60 calls to say money is moving strangely, or a caregiver's concern feels like a hand on their throat. We answer and triage. Fees for independent evaluations when a family is pressuring a diagnosis that does not fit. Funds for a second opinion on legal documents a smooth talker has shepherded into existence. A roster of attorneys willing to take on cases where the facts are messy and the clients are tired. An educational program that teaches bank tellers and pharmacists and postal workers what exploitation smells like on a humid day. We set up a hotline and trained volunteers to listen for quiet in the wrong places. The first case we helped with nearly broke me open. A retired school principal named Alice had a nephew who loved her when he needed something and shamed her when she hesitated. He'd brought her a floppy-haired consultant who sweet-talked a reverse mortgage onto her kitchen table. She blamed herself for believing them. I told her the truth that predators do not deserve the credit they claim, and that kindness is not gullibility. Joan, who announced she was too old to staff phones, but not too old to boss people, became our porch-to-porch messenger. She knew how to make a neighbor understand that what happens behind a neat hedge matters to the block. Naomi joined our board and brought that patient fierceness that makes bureaucracies blink. Daniel ran trainings that converted opaque phrases into human sense. When we received our first grant, a modest sum written in words that looked like promise, I sat at my kitchen table and pressed the check between my palms as if I could warm it into multiplying. I do not believe suffering ennobles. Suffering is just suffering. But sometimes what you build in response has a shape that feels like meaning. And meaning is the only architecture that lasts. In the spring, I returned to the community center. I walked into the card room, and people looked up with the frank curiosity of those who have heard things, but do not assume they know your heart. I brought a sheet of paper with bullet points about recognizing manipulation, and then laughed at myself because bullet points were the last thing that had saved me. Instead, I told a story, this one, but folded, a quilt reduced to lap size so people could carry it home. I did not say Clara's name. I do not speak it much anymore. It sits in me like a pebble in a shoe on a long walk, a reminder, not a wound that keeps bleeding. Some mornings, I wake at 6:15 a.m., and the first thing I feel is neither fear nor resolve. It is a lightness I once called youth. I brew coffee and carry it to the garden and say the names of things as I pass them: rosemary, brick, hose, sparrow. Naming is a kind of ownership that harms no one. Once in a while, a letter arrives from a woman who writes that she heard my story and realized the voice in her head that calls her silly for worrying belongs to someone else. These letters feel like finding coins in the couch the day before rent. I keep them in the same drawer where Thomas kept receipts. It feels right to let different kinds of proof live together. If this were a tidy tale, I would say the weather in my house changed for good, and I never again mistook quiet for danger, or love for a leash. Life is not tidy. There are hours when I hear the old voice of doubt, and it asks whether precautions are paranoia, and whether forgiving someone who has not asked is a moral virtue or a performance. I do not debate that voice anymore. I hand it a chore. It can check the windows or label the spices. I will be in the garden. Last month, I sat in a waiting room while a woman I'd never met told a social worker about a son who had taken her checkbook for convenience and blocked her from online banking because technology stresses her out. I listened to the rhythm of her shame and wanted to stand and shout that love is not a synonym for control. Instead, I sat in the wrong chair on purpose to see whether anyone would ask me to move. And when they did, I smiled and moved and remembered that power survives best when it knows how to yield without giving up the ground that matters. Vincent sent a letter from prison through the channels available to men who suddenly must learn systems they once thought were for other people. He wrote that he had loved me in his way, and that love had been real, even inside the fraud. I do not spend time arguing with paradoxes that serve the speaker. I left his letter unopened and asked Naomi to handle any future correspondence. Clara hasn't written. And the space where her words might be is a silence with edges. In that space, I place hope that is not sentimental, the hope that one day she will look at her choices and feel the weight of them without collapsing under it. The hope that she will make a life that does not require anyone else to be less, for her to be more. This is what I know now, and it is simple. The way we are taught to be good, polite, patient, accommodating can be turned against us by people who learned early how to treat kindness as a set of keys. But none of those traits are weaknesses when they are paired with boundaries that are not up for discussion. My story is not an argument for suspicion as a lifestyle. It is an invitation to build fences where you once planted hedges and to install gates that lock from the inside. When older women talk among ourselves, our laughter sounds like a hand striking a table in emphasis. We have survived things we never thought we'd see, and we will survive more. The lesson is not that trust is dangerous. The lesson is that trust, like a house, needs a foundation that begins with your own name written on the deed. If you have read this far, consider yourself part of my porch. Bring your tea. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what you have rebuilt. And if you are facing a version of what I faced, hear me clearly. You are not a burden. You are not overreacting. And it is not too late to set the table with documents that have your hand in the ink and your eyes on every line. Like this story, if it helped you breathe. Share it with someone who needs a witness. Subscribe if you want more stories that do not lie about danger and do not lie about joy. Leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from so we can make this porch long enough to seat everyone.